They say the greatest pain for a parent is when your child becomes estranged. I, Lawrence Drucker, have lived 65 years, buried my wife, endured 2 back surgeries and bloody pneumonia last winter. But nothing has hurt as much as watching my Hazel slowly fade out of my life. Sitting in my old chair by the window, I thumb through photos. Here she is, 5 years old with 2 front teeth knocked out, smiling proudly at the camera. Here Elaine and I were taking her to first grade. My late wife had insisted that she wear a dress to school, even though Hazel stubbornly wanted to wear overalls. She ended up wearing both, always the stubborn one. Outside the window of my small house in Big Bear Lake, rain was drizzling down. It was the house I'd bought 30 years ago when I joined the post office as a senior sorter. Elaine and I thought the mountain air would help her asthma. It didn't, but Hazel loved the lake and the mountains. Now she only comes here once every 2 months or so, and it's like she's forced to. The phone on the table rang, interrupting my thoughts. I struggled to get up, the damn back, and looked at the screen. Hazel, there's talk of a wolf. Dad, hi. Her voice sounded tense, as it always did when talking to me lately. How are you? I'm fine, I answered, suppressing the urge to tell the truth about my aching joints and insomnia. How are you? Work? Pierce? I'm fine, she said quickly, as if she were reciting a memorized text. Listen, Pierce and I have our wedding anniversary in 3 days. 2 years, we're having dinner at the Lake Peak. The Lake Peak is the most expensive restaurant in town, usually frequented by rich tourists and the local elite. I've been there exactly once when Hazel graduated from high school. I had to save money for 3 months. That's wonderful, I said, expecting to hear the duty story about their plans. I'd like you to come, she said after a pause. I almost dropped the phone. In their 2 years of marriage, this was the first invitation to a family event. Hazel usually found 1,000 reasons why I would be uncomfortable or bored at their gatherings. Yeah, I stammered, not knowing what to say. Please, Dad. Her voice had a hint of the same Hazel I'd known before we were married. It's important to me. Does Pierce know you're inviting me? I asked directly. Old age has its advantages. It's possible to be unceremonious. She was silent again, and I knew the answer. I'll tell him tonight, she said at last. It's a family holiday and you're my family. I chuckled. Family. The last 2 years had made it clear that Pierce and I had a very different definition of family. To me, family is people who accept you for who you are. For Pierce Price, family seems to be an item on his list of accomplishments, where everything has to fit his idea of prestige. From the first time I met this shabby financier, I sensed his attitude. He looked at my house with ill-concealed contempt. He looked at my old Toyota, at my hands with the ink under my fingernails from years of working at the post office. His politeness was a thin layer of icing on the cake of condescension. What time? I asked, deciding not to bring it up. 7 p.m. There was relief in her voice. Washu, we have reservations for 8 people, Pierce's parents, a couple of his co-workers and their wives, and you and me. Pierce's parents. This is going to be quite an evening. Clyde and Beverly Price, a smug couple who treated the wedding like their son married a slum girl. Although Elaine and I gave Hazel everything we could, a good home, an education, love. She graduated from college with honors, a degree in computer science and data analytics. I'm proud of her, and they looked at her as a good buy for their son, a pretty smart girl to show off in public. Okay, I'll be there, I said, swallowing all those thoughts. Thanks, Dad. She was silent again, as if she wanted to say something else, but changed her mind. I'll see you then. I hung up the phone and looked out the window. The rain was getting heavier. Drops drummed on the glass, forming whimsical paths. Little Hazel and I used to make up stories about those drops, which one would run faster to the windowsill, which one would meet another and form a stream. Now I watched them alone. That evening, I sat in the kitchen, drinking tea and pondering Hazel's invitation. Something in her voice disturbed me, a tension that hadn't been there before. Or was it? But I was only starting to notice it now. I pulled out my phone and opened the pictures she'd sent over the past few months. Hazel with Pierce at some social event, she in an elegant black dress, he in a tuxedo, Hazel at a company picnic. Alone, Pierce apparently taking pictures. Hazel and her friends, all with glasses of wine, laughing. She was smiling in all the pictures, but her eyes, there was something in her eyes that I couldn't decipher, or didn't want to. I remembered how she'd brought Pierce to meet her 2 years ago. Spring, apple blossoms in the yard. I was barbecuing, the one dish I always made perfectly. Hazel was nervous, fixing her hair, tugging on her dress. "He's special, Dad," she said as she helped me set the table. "He has such manners, and he knows so much about wine, about art, about finance. All that matters is that he's a good man," I said, spreading sauce on the ribs. She laughed. "You always say that, but he's really good. I think it's serious." I turned around and saw the same expression in her eyes that lovers have, a mixture of excitement, fear, and hope. My little girl was in love. I hugged her, staining her dress with my apron, and she didn't resent it like she usually did. When Pierce arrived, I couldn't help but notice Hazel's transformation. It was like she was glowing from the inside out, catching every word he said, laughing at every joke. And well, he was flawless, polite, attentive, smart, asked the right questions, complimented my barbecue, spoke warmly of Hazel, but I still felt the falseness. Perhaps it was just normal parental suspicion. Who was good enough for my daughter? Or maybe I noticed something Hazel, blinded by love, didn't see. The way he looked around my house with an appraising gaze. The way he wrinkled his nose slightly when I talked about my work. Adjusting the cuffs of a shirt that probably cost as much as my monthly pension. After that visit, Hazel called me in the evening, excited. "What do you think of him, Dad?" "A polite young man," I replied evasively. "Only polite?" There was disappointment in her voice. "And obviously in love with you," I added, because it was really obvious. No matter how I felt about Pierce, the way he looked at Hazel spoke for itself. "Did it?" She instantly cheered up. "You liked him?" "The important thing is that you like him, baby, and to make you happy." She breathed out a sigh of relief. "He does, Dad. He really does." I believed her then. Now looking at her pictures, I wasn't so sure. Something had changed in those 2 years. And it wasn't just that she was calling and visiting less often. It was in her voice, in her eyes, in the way she talked about Pierce, as if she were reading from a prepared text. I put the phone away and rubbed my eyes. Maybe I'm just an old, wishy-washy person. Maybe they're doing fine, and I'm making up problems because I'm lonely. The phone rang again. This time it wasn't a regular call, but a video call. Hazel. I pressed accept and saw her face. "Hi, Dad," she smiled, but I noticed she was in the car alone. "Just thought I'd just make sure you were really coming. You haven't changed your mind, have you?" "No, of course not," I answered, scrutinizing her face. "Is everything all right, Hazel?" She hesitated for a moment. "Yeah, everything's fine. It's just, Pierce is a little... He wasn't very happy when I told him I'd invited you." I felt something tighten inside. "I don't have to come if it's going to be a problem," I said, though I struggled with every word. "No," she almost shouted it. "No, Dad, please come. I really need you to be there." "Pierce. He'll get used to it. It's just that he wanted it to be just his parents and co-workers. But it's my anniversary too, right?" There was something akin to desperation in her eyes, and I realized I couldn't say no to her. "Sure, babe. I'll be there." She let out a sigh of relief. "Thank you. I gotta go. Pierce will be home from work soon. I'll see you the day after tomorrow." After that conversation, my anxiety only increased. What's going on in their family? Why would she want me around now, after 2 years of keeping me at a distance? I spent the next day preparing for dinner. I took my only decent suit out of the closet. I'd bought it for Elaine's funeral 5 years ago and had worn it twice since then, to Hazel's wedding and to the funeral of an old friend and coworker, Fred. The suit was hanging baggy. I'd lost weight in the last year. I'd have to do something about that. Half an hour later, I was already in the only decent men's clothing store in our town. The salesman, a young man with a neat beard, was patiently helping me choose a suit. "What's the occasion, sir?" he asked, showing me a gray three-piece suit. "My daughter's wedding anniversary," I replied. "Oh, congratulations," he smiled. "Then perhaps you'd like this navy blue one. It's more festive, but still elegant." I nodded, trying it on. The suit fit well, though the price made me cringe inwardly. Two of my pensions. But I didn't want to look out of place at this party. Not for Pierce or his snobby parents, but for Hazel. She's already apologizing to them for me all the time. I can feel it. I'll take it, I said, pulling out my credit card. When I got home, I called the restaurant. The plan had matured in my head since yesterday, after talking to Hazel. If I really wanted to help her, I needed to do more than just show up for dinner. Dash. Lake Peak, how can I help you? A pleasant female voice answered. Good afternoon, I said. You have a reservation under Price's name for the night after tomorrow. I would like to pay for the entire dinner in advance. One moment, I'll check the information. Sounded in the phone. Yes, table for 7 p.m. Do you want to pay in advance? Full payment, I clarified, and I'd like to keep it a secret for the rest of the evening. Of course, sir, we can arrange that. You will need to come tomorrow to fill out some paperwork and make the payment. I will, I replied and hung up the phone. It was a crazy gesture. Dinner at a restaurant like this for 8 people would cost me half of my annual savings. But something inside told me it was important, that Hazel needed my support more than ever, even if she didn't realize it herself. I sat on the veranda of my house, watching the sunset over the lake, and thought about my life. About how Elaine and I had come here with little Hazel, full of hope for a new life. About how I worked at the post office, sometimes working double shifts to pay for Elaine's house and medical care. About how we were saving for Hazel's education, not just college, but the prestigious university she dreamed of. Most people saw me as just a postal clerk, living an ordinary, unremarkable life. They didn't know about my past, my family, the decisions I made, and I never sought to dissuade them. I chose my path deliberately, and I've never regretted it, until now. For the first time in years, I wondered if I'd made a mistake hiding a part of my life from my daughter. Maybe if she knew the truth, she wouldn't have let Pierce and his parents look down on me. Maybe she wouldn't have had to feel ashamed of her father. But no, I made this decision a long time ago and for good reason, and it wouldn't be right to change it now. I'll just be there for Hazel when she needs me. I always do. The night before dinner, I took 2 envelopes out of the safe. In the first was a check, an anniversary present for Hazel and Pierce, a modest sum by Price standards, but it was from the heart. The second envelope I put in my inside jacket pocket. Insurance, just in case. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The new suit fit well, I looked decent, not like a Wall Street financier, but not like a retiree who didn't belong at a table with decent people, whatever Pierce thought. The phone vibrated, a message from Hazel. Waiting for you, Dad. Thanks for agreeing to come. I smiled and replied, on my way out. See you later. Putting on my coat, I walked out of the house and got into my old Toyota. The drive to the restaurant was only 15 minutes, but I had left early. I wanted to walk around a bit, gather my thoughts. Big Bear Lake was especially beautiful in the evening. The lake reflected the lights of the city, and the air smelled of pine trees and approaching fall. I parked in a parking lot near downtown and walked slowly toward the restaurant. The lake top was perched on a hill overlooking the entire city and lake, the perfect place for special occasions. On the way, I pondered what I would say to Hazel and Pierce. I would congratulate them sincerely. Despite my doubts, I wanted my daughter to be happy. I'd be polite to Pierce's parents, even if they continued to look at me as second-class citizens. And maybe by the end of the evening, I would have more clarity about what was going on in Hazel's life. I decided that I would watch her closely, her interactions with Pierce, how she handles herself in front of his parents and coworkers. Perhaps my concern is unfounded. Perhaps she is truly happy in her new life. Just as strange from me, as is often the case when children grow up and start their own families. But if I'm right and something is wrong, well, then I'll have to decide what to do next. And this dinner could be a turning point for all of us. The morning of the anniversary day was clear, a rarity for this time of year in Big Bear Lake. I woke up earlier than usual, though I already get up at first light, a habit from when I worked at the post office. 30 years of sorting letters and packages had taught me to appreciate the morning hours. A new suit hung on the closet door. Dark blue with barely noticeable texture. Expensive. Much more expensive than what I usually afforded myself. I'd picked it up yesterday from the tailor's shop, where I'd had it tailored. I'd lost a lot of weight in recent years and nothing in my closet fit properly. Excellent choice, Mr. Drucker, said the tailor, an elderly Korean man named Song, when I arrived for the fitting. It's a good color for men with gray hair. I chuckled as I looked at my reflection. Gray hair was the only thing I had left in abundance. I once had thick brown hair that Elaine liked so much. My bear, she called me, running her fingers through my hair. Now all I have of that bear are memories and pictures in my scrapbook. After breakfast, oatmeal and coffee, as always, I pulled out my old wallet and checked the contents. Cash just in case, although places like Lake Peak pay mostly with cards. A picture of Elaine, the one of her laughing, sitting on the lake shore with little Hazel on her lap. And a couple of cards, including one I rarely reach for, a black card with a gold border. No logo, just my name engraved in gold letters. Few people knew it existed, and I preferred to keep it that way, but it could come in handy today. I put the wallet in the inside pocket of my jacket and sent 2 envelopes there as well. One with a birthday card and a check, an anniversary present. The other was just in case. At 6:30, I left the house. It would take 15 minutes to get to the restaurant, but I wanted to be there early. Not that I had any special plans, I was just nervous. I hadn't seen Pierce in 2 years. I'd had little contact with my daughter, and now it was a family dinner with my son-in-law's parents and his co-workers. The thought of it made my stomach churn. I turned on the radio on the way, an old habit that helped distract me. The Beatles were playing Let It Be, the song I'd put on at Elaine and I's wedding. I suddenly imagined her now beside me in the passenger seat with her perennial, "Lawrence, you worry too much. Everything's going to be all right." "I hope you're right, darling," I mumbled into the void of the cabin. My old Toyota was slowly making its way up the mountain. Big Bear Lake stretched out below, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. The tourist season was coming to an end, and the town was beginning to return to its normal rhythm quiet, measured as befits a small mountain town. I couldn't help but remember our first conversation with Pierce, when Hazel had first introduced us to each other. We were standing in the yard of my house. I was barbecuing, and he, perfectly dressed even for an informal meeting, asked with polite interest, "And how do you like living in such a secluded place?" "It suits me fine," I answered then. "Quiet, beautiful, people know each other." "Yes, but—" He waved his hand around the neighborhood. "There's absolutely nothing here. No decent restaurants, no theaters, no career opportunities." He made it sound like I was living in a cave, not a 3-room house in a tourist town 2 hours outside of Los Angeles. "Not everyone needs theaters," I replied then, flipping stakes. "Some people just need good people around them and a roof over their heads." He nodded as if I'd confirmed his assumptions about my primitiveness. And 2 months later, he proposed to Hazel and took her away to his world, a world of financial advice, business dinners, and country clubs where people like me appear only as support staff. I sighed involuntarily, remembering how my daughter had changed since marriage. Her calls had become less frequent, shorter, and filled with a kind of fake cheerfulness. When I'd ask if everything was okay, she'd invariably reply, "Sure, Dad, everything's fine. Just a lot of work." But I sensed something was wrong. I'd only seen her 3 times in the last year: Thanksgiving, Christmas, and in the spring, when she'd unexpectedly come up for the weekend, alone, without Pierce. She said he had to work, but I noticed a trace of tears on her face. When I asked what was wrong, she brushed it off. "Just tired, Dad. Work, home, same old stuff." I didn't push it then. Maybe it was just fatigue or a minor spat with her husband. But now, heading into this anniversary, I sensed something more serious had happened. My thoughts were interrupted by the phone ringing. Hazel. "Hi, Dad." Her voice sounded strained. "Are you on your way?" "Yeah, I'll be there in about 10 minutes. Is everything okay?" "Yeah, of course," she answered a little too quickly. "It's just, Pierce invited another couple at the last minute, a co-worker and his wife. I wanted to warn you not to be surprised." "Okay," I said, sensing that there was more to it than that. "Anything else?" She was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "No. I mean, yes. Dad, Pierce's parents, they're a little complicated, especially his mom. Just ignore her if she says something, wrong. Don't worry, baby. I tried to make my voice sound confident. I'll survive one night with your mother-in-law. Thank you, she sounded relieved. I'll see you at the restaurant. I hung up the phone and frowned. What could Beverly Price have to say that Hazel felt it necessary to warn me? I had some idea, though. At the wedding, she'd looked at me like some exotic animal who'd accidentally wandered into the reception. So you've really worked at the post office all your life? How unusual, she said then, and there was a definite how pathetic in her voice. I parked in the restaurant's parking lot a half hour before the appointed time. Lake Top was housed in a glass building on the highest point in the city with panoramic windows overlooking the lake. In the evening, the lights were turned on, and it looked like the restaurant was floating above the city like a spaceship from a science fiction movie. Getting out of the car, I pulled on my jacket and adjusted my tie. Nearby were cars, each worth many times the annual pension of a former postal worker. Mercedes, BMWs, a couple of Porsches. My old Toyota looked like a tramp at a social event. At the entrance, I was met by the doorman, a young man in uniform with an expression of polite indifference on his face. He opened the door with a slight bow, and I entered the cool foyer, smelling something floral and expensive. Good evening, the receptionist at the desk greeted me. What can I do for you? I'm here for the Price dinner, I replied. Wedding anniversary. She checked her clipboard and smiled. Sure, Mr. Drucker. Lawrence Drucker. I'm the father of the bride. I mean, wife, I corrected myself, feeling awkward. Mr. Drucker. Her smile grew a little warmer. You're the first of the guests. Would you like to wait at a table or in the lounge area? I wondered. Sitting alone at a large table seemed awkward. The lounge, perhaps. She led me into a cozy space with soft sofas and low tables by the panoramic windows. I ordered a whiskey, the cheapest on the menu, but still costing as much as a bottle of good liquor at the supermarket, and settled down in a corner where I could see the entrance. 15 minutes later, the first guests arrived, an elderly couple I recognized immediately as Clyde and Beverly Price. He was tall, with graying temples and the posture of a man accustomed to command. She was slender, perfectly styled, with a string of pearls around her neck. I'd seen them only a few times at the engagement party, at the wedding, and once in passing when I'd stopped by to visit Hazel in Los Angeles. Each time they'd been equally coldly polite and acted like they were doing me a favor by talking to me. The receptionist escorted them to a table in the far corner of the room. It was the perfect spot, secluded but with a view of the lake and the sunset. I had no doubt that Pierce had reserved the best table in the restaurant. 10 minutes later, another couple arrived, a man about Pierce's age and a woman with bright red hair and an elegant bun. From the way they greeted Pierce's parents, they were co-workers or family friends. I finished my whiskey, left a generous tip, and decided it was time to join the others. As I was coming upstairs, I saw them, Pierce and Hazel, entering the restaurant. My daughter looked stunning in a dark green dress that emphasized her figure and the reddish shade of hair she'd inherited from Elaine. But something about her face alarmed me, the tension at the corners of her lips, the frown on her brow. Pierce, on the other hand, radiated confidence. In his impeccable suit, his hair perfect, he led her under his arm like an expensive trophy. I froze as I watched them approach the table where the other guests were already seated. Pierce hugged his parents, introduced his co-worker and his wife, Hazel. Everyone smiled, raising their glasses. Hazel was smiling too, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. She looked back at the entrance periodically, obviously waiting for me. I took a deep breath and headed toward their table. As I approached, I began to distinguish their voices. Still an odd choice for an anniversary, Beverly, Pierce's mother, was saying. Big Bear Lake, really? Clyde and I always celebrated the Four Seasons in Los Angeles. Hazel wanted to be closer to her father, Pierce replied in a tone like he was doing her a favor. Although I did suggest a restaurant on the beach in Malibu. Is he coming? Clyde, Pierce's father, asked with obvious distaste. Hazel opened her mouth to answer, but Pierce beat her to it. I hope not. I told Hazel it was inappropriate. After all, this is our holiday, not a family picnic. I froze a few steps away from the table, startled by his words. Pierce! Hazel's voice was indignant. We talked about this. Dad's my family, and I want him here. Honey, Pierce lowered his voice, but I could still hear every word. Your father is, let's just say he's not up to par for this evening. You see who's here? My parents. Warren's my boss, by the way. What are we going to do if your dad starts telling his mail stories or complaining about his back? Hazel's face turned pale. He won't do that. He knows how to behave in society. Beverly intervened with fake concern. Honey, Pierce is right. Your father's a good man, but we have different social circles. He won't be comfortable. I think you're the one who's uncomfortable, Hazel said sharply, and I recognized the tone as that of the daughter I'd raised. I stood in the shadow of the column, clenching my fists and trying to control myself. I'd never considered myself a violent person. 30 years of working at the post office had taught me patience. But Pierce's words that I was not up to par for this evening stung worse than acid. It wasn't even a matter of wounded pride. It was the way Hazel, my daughter, was caught between me and this arrogant lowlife she'd had the misfortune to choose as her husband. Taking a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and stepped forward. Let them see that even a rough postal worker could take a punch. But no sooner had I taken 3 steps than the conversation continued, and what I heard made me freeze again. Honestly, Hazel, Pierce's voice grew louder, obviously from the champagne. Your father and his stories about the post office and fishing would have killed the atmosphere. I still remember at our wedding when he tried to explain to my Uncle Robert, who, by the way, is on the board of directors of 3 companies, how to put a worm on a hook. Beverly chuckled, covering her mouth with her napkin. Yes, it was. Colorful. I'd say ridiculous, Clyde snorted. But what can you do, dear? He patted Hazel's arm. We all make sacrifices for family, and your sacrifice is a background you have to put up with. I saw my daughter flinch as if slapped. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked quickly, driving them back. I don't consider my father a victim, she said quietly but firmly. He gave me everything he could. Education, support, and low social status, darling, Pierce interrupted her, sipping his champagne. Let's call things by their proper names. Your father is a retired postal worker from a backwater town. No connections, no social standing, no prospects. Frankly, he lowered his voice to a pseudo-confidential whisper that was nevertheless perfectly audible. Your uncouth father-in-law is the anchor that pulls you down every time you try to rise to our level. My heart was pounding so hard it seemed like its pounding should be audible to everyone in the restaurant. I didn't recognize this man. Where was the polite, courteous Pierce who had asked for my daughter's hand in marriage 2 years ago, promising to take care of her? Or was it a mask he dropped as soon as he got what he wanted? Pierce, please. Hazel's voice sounded desperate. Let's not talk about this tonight. When? He snapped, and I saw his face contort with anger. You're always defending him, always making excuses. Dad can't come to Roger's appointment. His back hurts. Dad won't go to the opera with us. He doesn't like classical music. And the truth is, he just doesn't fit into our lives, Hazel. And the sooner you admit that, the better for everyone. The red-haired woman, Freya, Pierce's boss's wife, squirmed in her chair, clearly uncomfortable. Her husband, Warren, was studying the menu with exaggerated attention, trying not to interfere with the family conflict. I decided I'd had enough. It was time to intervene before that pompous turkey brought my daughter to tears at the holiday table. Good evening, everyone, and I said as calmly as I could as I approached the table. 6 pairs of eyes stared at me. Pierce's face changed when he turned around and saw me. Shock, then panic, then an attempt at a polite smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. Lawrence, he said, rising. What a surprise. Dad. Hazel jumped up and hugged me tightly, desperately, like a drowning man grasping for a life preserver. You came. Of course I came. I kissed her cheek, feeling her tremble. You invited me. I'm here. Clyde and Beverly exchanged glances. Freya looked on with curiosity and, I thought, sympathy. Warren looked embarrassed. This is my father, Lawrence Drucker. Hazel introduced me to the others, trying to keep her voice lighthearted. I nodded, shook hands with the men, smiled at the women. Everyone pretended that nothing had happened, that I hadn't heard their conversation. Everyone except Pierce, who stood there with a frozen smile and the look of a hunted animal. "Have a seat, Mr. Drucker," Beverly said with a strained smile. I took the only empty seat between Hazel and Freya. The waiter came over with a bottle of champagne and filled my glass. I took a sip, feeling the bubbles tickle my palate. Expensive champagne, no doubt about it. I'd only had it a few times in my life. "So," Pierce began, obviously trying to lighten the mood, "we were just discussing how fast these 2 years have flown by." A clumsy attempt to change the subject. I could have played along, pretended I hadn't heard, for Hazel's sake, for the sake of keeping the party going. But something inside me snapped. Maybe it was 2 years of resentment for the way he'd treated my daughter. Maybe it was fatigue from constantly feeling like I wasn't good enough for their world. Either way, I decided it was time to set the record straight. "You know, Pierce," I said, looking him straight in the eye, "I seem to have come at a bad time. I believe you were discussing my, how did you put it, low social status?" Pierce's face went pale, then red. Hazel grabbed my hand. "Dad, please." "It's okay, baby." I patted her hand. "I just want to set the record straight. Pierce doesn't think I'm right for your social circle. And you know what? He's probably right." I looked around the table, expensive dishes, crystal glasses, silverware, gourmet appetizers I couldn't even pronounce. I'm just a retired postal worker. I'm not a wine connoisseur. I've never been to the opera. I don't belong to country clubs. But I've never been ashamed of my life or my work. I am proud of the fact that I served people honorably for 30 years, delivering important letters, packages, congratulations, condolences. I was a part of their lives, albeit small, unnoticeable, but important. Pierce looked like he wanted to fall through the ground. Beverly was nervously rubbing her pearl necklace. Clyde was staring into his glass with the look of a man in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Lawrence," Pierce began, but I raised my hand to stop him. "Let me finish," I said. I could pretend now that I hadn't heard. I could sit here all evening, smiling and making small talk, but I'm too old for that kind of game, and I have too much respect for myself. I turned to Hazel and took her hand. "Little girl, I came here for you, but if my presence is causing trouble, I'd rather leave." There were tears in her eyes. "Daddy, no, please stay." Pierce didn't mean it. "Really, Pierce?" All eyes turned to him. He swallowed, adjusted his tie, obviously trying to find a way out. "Of course," he finally said unconvincingly. "I just, it's been a long day at work, and I've had a little too much champagne. Of course you must stay, Lawrence. You're Hazel's father, and we're glad you're here." Falsehood in every word. I could almost physically feel him forcing himself to say those words. I could see the muscle in his cheek twitching, a sign of restrained rage. And then something in him snapped. Maybe it was the champagne, perhaps the stress of the job he'd mentioned, or more likely he just couldn't hide his true attitude towards me any longer. "Actually, you know what?" He set his glass down abruptly on the table, spilling the champagne. "No, I'm not happy. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of pretending to be comfortable at the same table with a man who doesn't even know which fork to use to eat fish with." "Pierce," Sawir, Hazel went pale. "Stop it right now." "No, honey, let your father know the truth." He turned to me, and in his eyes I saw pure, unconcealed hatred. "You're not fit to be in my family. Go away." There was dead silence in the restaurant. Even the waiters seemed to freeze, unable to believe their ears. Beverly covered her mouth with her hand. Clyde looked at his son with an expression that was hard to decipher, a mixture of shock and, oddly enough, shame. Freya muttered something like, "Oh my God," and Warren studied the ceiling intently, as if it said how to get out of this situation. Hazel jumped up, knocking over her chair. "How dare you?" Her voice shook with rage. "This is my father, the man who spent his whole life taking care of me, who supported me in everything. And you. She couldn't finish her sentence. Tears sprang from her eyes. I got up and hugged her, feeling her shaking. "Shh, baby," I whispered in her ear. "It's okay." "No, it's not okay," she sobbed. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I'm sorry for all of this." I stroked her back, the way I used to do when she was little, and came running to me with broken knees or after a fight with her girlfriends. You have nothing to apologize for, I said. But I think I'd better go. Hazel shook her head. No, Dad. If anyone should leave, it's... Pierce interrupted her, jumping up from his seat. This is ridiculous. It's our wedding anniversary, Hazel. Are you really going to let your father ruin our evening? I saw my daughter's face change. Something had finally broken in her, some last thread that still bound her to this man. You ruined it, Pierce, she said quietly. Not my father. Pierce turned to me, and I saw real hatred in his eyes. This is all because of you. You've always been between us, always judging me, always thinking I wasn't good enough for your precious daughter. I never judged you, Pierce, I replied calmly. I just wanted my daughter to be happy, and I'm sorry you couldn't provide that. He jerked as if I'd hit him. You have no idea what I'm providing for Hazel, he gritted through his teeth. A home you could never give her, a life you could only dream of, a status that... Which chokes me, Pierce, Hazel interrupted him. Have you ever asked how I feel in your world? In a world where I have to conform all the time? Where I can't be myself? Pierce snorted. Oh, so now you're the victim? Poor little Hazel, forced to go to spas, wear designer clothes, and socialize with people who have achieved something in life? Enough, I said firmly. I'm not going to let you talk to my daughter like that. He turned to me, his face twisted with anger. And who are you to tell me what to do? A penniless pensioner who can't even afford to eat at a decent restaurant. It was a moment when I could have flared up, responded with rudeness to rudeness, but instead I felt a strange calmness. I knew what I had to do. You're wrong, Pierce, I said. I can afford dinner here. In fact, I've already paid for it. His face showed a look of incomprehension. What? I turned to the receptionist, who was standing nearby, clearly attracted by the noise at our table. Miss, could you confirm that I paid in advance for the price table? She nodded. Yes, Mr. Drucker. Full prepayment was made yesterday. Pierce's face was priceless. Shock, disbelief, then slow realization. You? He was staring at me. You paid for dinner? But how? I mean, it's expensive? I smiled. Yes, a little bit. But I wanted to surprise you for your anniversary. But... He hesitated. I don't understand. That was before I knew what you really thought of me, I continued. Now I guess a gift isn't appropriate. I turned to the receptionist again. I'd like to cancel this payment. She looked surprised. Sir, this is unusual request, but technically possible since dinner hasn't been served yet. In that case, I'd like my money back, I said. Are there any forms to fill out? Yes, sir, she nodded. If you'll come with me to the front desk. I turned back to the table. I apologize, but I need to take care of this matter. Pierce looked like he'd been kicked in the butt. Beverly and Clyde sat with equally dumbfounded expressions on their faces. Freya looked at me with undisguised admiration, and Warren looked at me with a new respect. Hazel took a step toward the table and picked up her purse. I'll come with you, Dad. No, Pierce said sharply. You're staying. It's our anniversary and we're going to celebrate, with or without your father. Hazel turned to him. You don't get it, do you? There's nothing to celebrate, Pierce. There hasn't been for a long time. Her words hung in the air, heavy, final. She walked over to me and took me under her arm. Come on, Dad. Together we headed toward the front desk, leaving the table behind us engulfed in awkward silence. I could feel the stares of the other diners, but I didn't care. The only thing that mattered in this moment was that my daughter was by my side, and I could protect her again like I had done her whole life. At the counter, I quickly filled out the necessary forms. The refund amount was not insignificant, but every penny was worth the look I saw on Pierce's face when he realized that the irascible father-in-law had just canceled payment for their lavish dinner. The money will be returned to your card within 3 business days, Mr. Drucker, the receptionist said. Thank you, I nodded, and I apologize for the inconvenience. Don't be, sir, she smiled understandingly. It happens. Hazel stood nearby, nervously rubbing the strap of her purse. Her eyes were red from crying, but in them I saw a determination I hadn't seen in a long time. "What now?" she asked quietly. Now I took her hand. "We can go. Or if you want, we can have dinner somewhere else. I know a place by the lake that serves excellent fish." She smiled weakly. "Sounds great, Dad." We were on our way out when I heard footsteps behind me and Pierce's voice. "Hazel! Wait!" Pierce's face contorted with rage as he watched Hazel and I head for the exit of the restaurant. I saw him clench and unclench his fists as if fighting the urge to rush after us. Behind him sat the confused guests, his parents with frozen smiles and co-workers awkwardly glancing among themselves. "You can't just leave," he shouted after us. "It's our anniversary, damn it." I felt Hazel flinch, but she kept walking, holding my hand tightly. Her face was pale but determined. "I think your husband is out of sort," I told her quietly. "Maybe we should stay." She shook her head. "No, Dad. It's not the first time I've seen him like this. It's just that, before, it was never directed at you." Those words alarmed me more than anything I'd ever heard before. "What do you mean, not the first time? How often did Pierce have these angry outbursts? And more importantly, how did he treat my daughter when there were no witnesses?" We were almost to the door when I heard the sound of quick footsteps behind me. Turning around, I saw the maitre d', an older man with impeccable posture and a look of professional concern on his face, hurrying toward us. "Dash Mr. Drucker, miss." He bowed slightly. "I apologize for the inconvenience. Mr. Price would like you to return to your table. He says there's been a misunderstanding." Hazel grinned bitterly. "A misunderstanding? Is that what he calls publicly insulting my father?" The maitre d' looked embarrassed. "I'm just relaying his words, miss." I hesitated for a moment. Part of me wanted to just walk away, leaving Pierce alone with the consequences of his behavior. But the other part, the part that was used to making informed decisions, told me that I needed to put a stop to this story here and now. "Okay," I said finally. "We'll be back for a while." Hazel looked at me with surprise. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I nodded. "It's better to end this civilized." The maitre d' looked relieved. "Follow me, please." When we returned to the table, Pierce had already pulled himself together. His face had taken on a mask of professional courtesy, the kind he must have worn for important clients. But I could see a vein pulsing on his temple, a sign of restrained rage. "Hazel, Lawrence," he made a broad gesture with his hand. "I sincerely apologize for the outburst. It was inexcusable of me. Please sit down. Let us forget this unpleasant episode and continue our evening." His voice sounded unnaturally steady, like an actor who had forgotten that the play was over long ago, but was still playing his part. Clyde Price coughed. "I joined my son in apologizing. It was an inappropriate reaction to stress. We all say things we don't mean sometimes." Beverly nodded with a fake smile. "Absolutely right. Family holidays are always a little emotional." I felt Hazel's hand on my elbow tense. She didn't believe this apology was sincere, and I understood her. It was too late for regrets. Too much had been said. "Thank you for the invitation," I began in a steady voice, "but I think we'd better leave. The evening is already ruined." Pierce's face contorted again. "But I apologized. What more do you want?" His parents exchanged worried glances. Warren, Pierce's boss, looked increasingly uncomfortable. "It's not about apologizing, Pierce," Hazel said quietly. "It's about what you really think of my father, about my family, about my ancestry." I said that in the heat of the moment. He tried to take her hand, but she pulled away. "You know I respect your father. It's just been a hard day, and I've been—" "Stop it," Hazel cut him off. "No more lies. You never respected my father. You always looked down on him, always shamed him in front of your friends and coworkers." Pierce clenched his jaws. "That's not true. It is," she insisted. "And you know what? I let you do it. I kept quiet when you made jokes about his work. I didn't argue when you forgot to invite him to our events. I even started seeing him less often because you were always unhappy after our meetings." I listened to her with a growing feeling of pain in my chest. I guessed that things weren't going well in their marriage, but I hadn't realized how deep that crack was. "Hazel," I said softly, "there's no need to—" "No, Dad." She turned to me, tears in her eyes. "You have to know. I betrayed you. for a man who's not worth your little finger. Pierce went ballistic. That's enough. You are my wife, and I demand respect. Respect must be earned, I said calmly. That was the drop that overflowed the cup. Pierce jumped up, knocking over his chair. You! He jabbed his finger at me. It's all because of you. You've been turning her against me since the beginning. I never said anything bad about you, I shook my head. Even when I saw the way you treated my daughter. You don't know anything about our lives, he shouted. The maitre d' was already rushing to our table, attracted by the commotion. The other diners were looking at us curiously. Sir, said the maitre d' to Pierce, I must ask you to be quiet. You're disturbing the other guests. To hell with the other guests, Pierce snapped at him. This is my party, and I will behave as I see fit. The maitre d' straightened up. In that case, sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Pierce stared at him in disbelief. What? You can't throw me out. Do you know who I am? Shubbity hummum. I'm afraid it doesn't matter, sir, the maitre d' replied firmly. This kind of behavior is not welcome in our restaurant, regardless of the status of the guest. Beverly laughed nervously. What a misunderstanding. Pierce, darling, calm down. You're embarrassing us all. Clyde put his hand on his son's shoulder. Sit down, Pierce. Now. There was a note of steel in his voice, and Pierce, hesitating, obeyed. His face was still flaming with anger, but he controlled himself by muttering an apology to the maitre d'. All right, said the maitre d', softening a little. But I must remind you that we reserve the right to refuse service if this behavior is repeated. He left, leaving a tense silence at the table. I glanced at Hazel. She looked exhausted but determined. We should go, I said quietly. She nodded. Yes. Pierce gave us a hateful look, but he didn't say anything. His parents looked like they wanted to fall through the ground. We had already gone a few steps away when a waiter came to our table with a piece of paper in his hand. I'm sorry, Mr. Price. I heard his voice, but there's a problem with your dinner bill. Pierce frowned. What kind of problem? I haven't even asked for the bill yet. The thing is, sir, the waiter stammered, the prepayment that was made earlier has been canceled. So I'll need to get a new form of payment from you. Pierce's face contorted with embarrassment and rage. What? What prepayment? Mr. Drucker paid in full for your table yesterday, sir, the waiter explained, but he had just canceled it. All eyes at the table turned in our direction. I stopped, feeling Hazel squeeze my hand. Did you pay for dinner? She asked in a whisper. And canceled the payment after Pierce insulted you. I nodded. I wanted to surprise you on your anniversary. But as you can see, circumstances have changed. Something akin to admiration flashed in her eyes. But how could you afford it? A dinner here for 8 people must cost. A lot, I finished for her. But I can afford it. I saw Pierce's face shift between disbelief, anger, and finally something akin to fear. That's impossible, he said, looking at me. You worked at the post office. You're living on a pension. I shrugged. Life is full of surprises, Pierce. Clyde Price, who had been silent until then, suddenly stepped forward, looking into my face. Drucker. Lawrence Drucker. I know that name. He pulled his cell phone out of his pocket, dialed something quickly, then his eyes widened. Oh my God. You're the Drucker guy? One of the early investors in Blue Ridge Technologies? I smiled. I'm surprised you know that. Most people aren't aware of who's behind the company. Blue Ridge? Pierce frowned. The same technology company which is one of your firm's biggest clients, Clyde finished for him. Yes, son, that's the one. Warren, Pierce's boss, who until that moment had been keeping out of the family conflict, suddenly perked up. Mr. Drucker, if I'm not mistaken, are you on the Blue Ridge Board of Directors? Not anymore, I shook my head. I retired from active management a few years ago, but I'm still one of the largest shareholders. Pierce's face turned a greenish hue. Blue Ridge Technologies was a company that was not only an important client of his firm, but as I knew from talking to Hazel, had recently entrusted them with the management of a significant portion of its assets. If I had wanted to, I could have stripped Pierce's firm of that contract with one phone call. But, why? He finally squeezed out. Why didn't you ever tell me that I had money? I finished for him. Why? So you'd feel more comfortable talking to me? So that you wouldn't think of me as a cantankerous father-in-law? Hazel looked at me wide-eyed. Dad, I don't understand. All these years, you could have had a very different life. Why did you work at the post office? Why live in such a humble house? I took her hand. Because I like it that way, baby. I never aspired to luxury or status. I invested in Blue Ridge over 20 years ago, when it was a small company with big ideas. I was lucky, it took a shot, but it didn't change who I am. But you never told me? There was resentment in her voice. I wanted you to appreciate the simple things, I explained. To realize that happiness isn't about money or status. I've seen what happens to the children of rich parents. They grow up with a distorted view of the world, of the value of work, of real relationships. I glanced at Pierce, who sat staring into the void in front of him. Besides, I added more quietly, I had my own reasons for avoiding publicity. My family, we have a complicated history. Hazel looked shocked. I understood her. In one evening, her view of me, of her husband, of her own life had been turned upside down. We need to talk, she said at last. A serious talk. I nodded. Sure, baby girl. Whenever you're ready. Pierce finally came out of his daze. Hazel, we need to talk too. His voice sounded different, without the arrogance of before. Alone. She shook her head. Not tonight, Pierce. I need time to think. About a lot of things. But, Motorm. He started to object, but his father put a hand on his shoulder, stopping him. Pierce, Clyde said quietly but firmly. That's enough. You've already said too much for today. It was probably the first time I had anything resembling respect for Pierce's father. We're leaving, I said. Hazel, are you with me? She nodded, then turned back to the table. I'm sorry for ruining the evening. Beverly tried to smile. That's okay, honey. It happens. Call us tomorrow, okay? Hazel didn't answer. She took one last look at Pierce, a look of disappointment, pain, and something else that looked like release, and we headed out together. Already at the door, I heard Warren say to Pierce, You better fix this, and fast. If we lose the contract with Blue Ridge because of your antics. I didn't listen to the rest. We stepped out into the cool evening air, and I took a deep breath, feeling the tension of the last few hours begin to let go. Where to now? Hazel asked quietly. To my house, I suggested. We could order a pizza, like old times. A faint smile appeared on her face. That sounds great. We reached my car in silence. I opened the door for her, and as she settled into the passenger seat, I saw a tear roll down her cheek. Hey, I gently touched her shoulder. It's going to be okay, baby girl. She shook her head. I don't know, Dad. I don't know what to do now. With Pierce, with our marriage, with what I found out about you. You'll have time to think about it, I assured her. No rash decisions. She nodded, wiping away her tears. Thank you for coming tonight. For not leaving me, even when Pierce. I'll never leave you, baby, I said, getting behind the wheel. Never. We drove out of the restaurant parking lot, leaving behind Pierce, his parents, his co-workers, and the world of ostentatious glitz and fake smiles that my daughter had been trying to find her place in for the past 2 years. We had a serious conversation ahead of us, about the past, about the present, about what comes next. But now in this moment, I felt strangely calm. For the first time in a long time, Hazel was by my side, and I knew that whatever decision she made, I would support her. As we pulled up to my house, she suddenly turned to me. Dad, I have to apologize for all the times I've drifted away from you. When I let Pierce talk about you like that, you have nothing to apologize for. I shook my head. Yes, I do, she insisted. I betrayed you for a man who wasn't not who I thought he was. I parked in front of the house and turned to her. Hazel, listen to me. You didn't do anything wrong. You fell in love with a man, married him, tried to build a family. There's no shame in that. But I should have seen what he was really like. Her voice shook. I should have realized sooner. Love often blinds you. I smiled softly. Believe me, I know that from experience. She looked at me questioningly, and I realized it was time for a long, frank conversation about my past, about our family, about the secrets I'd kept all these years. "Let's go inside," I said, turning off the engine. "I think we could both use a cup of hot tea, and maybe something stronger." She nodded and got out of the car. I followed her, watching her walk toward the porch of the house she'd grown up in. In her gait, in the tilt of her head, I could still see the little girl I'd once taught to ride her bike and tie her shoelaces. But now there was a grown woman in front of me, standing on the threshold of important decisions. And all I could do was be there for her, support her, and love her no matter what happened. We walked into the house and I closed the door behind us, leaving the world outside that had shown its true colors today. The drive home passed in silence. Hazel stared out the window, absorbed in her own thoughts, and I took my time breaking her musings. After the events at the restaurant, we both needed time to process what had happened. She decided not to stay the night at my place, and I didn't insist. "I need to get some things out of the house and think things over," she said as I dropped her off at a small lakeside hotel. "I'll come by tomorrow, Dad. We need to talk." When I got home, I sat in a chair by the window for a long time, looking out at the dark surface of the lake, shimmering faintly in the moonlight. It was at times like this that I felt Elaine's absence most keenly. She always knew how to find the right words when I was distraught. On the mantelpiece stood our wedding photograph. I reached up, picked it up, ran my finger over my wife's smiling face. She was so beautiful that day, in a simple white dress, with a wreath of wildflowers in her red hair. We were married on the lawn behind her parents' house, no lavish ceremony or expensive restaurant. Just two people promising to love each other for the rest of our lives. "What would you say now, Elaine?" I whispered, looking at the photograph. "What should I do with our daughter? How do I help her?" Of course, there was no answer, but somehow I felt a strange calmness. Elaine had always believed that things would work out for the best if you acted out of love, not fear or anger. I put the photograph back in its place and walked into the kitchen. Habitually, I put the kettle on, took out my favorite mug, the one Hazel had given me for my 60th birthday, inscribed "to the best dad in the world." This simple routine was soothing, bringing me back to normalcy after the emotional turmoil of the evening. Sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, I thought back to our life with Elaine. How we moved to Big Bear Lake when Hazel was only 5 years old. How I got a job at the post office and Elaine worked part-time at the local library. Our little house that we gradually furnished, turning it into a cozy nest. Evenings spent playing board games with my daughter, picnics by the lake, hikes in the mountains. It was a simple life, but it brought us joy. Elaine never complained that we could have lived differently, more luxuriously. She understood why I chose this path and supported me. "Money is a tool, not a goal," she often said. "It's how you use it that matters." And I used it quietly, discreetly. Invested in promising companies, including Blue Ridge Technologies when it was just a startup with ambitious plans. Paid for the best doctors for Elaine when she got sick. Set up a trust fund for Hazel so she could get an education at any university she chose. But I never told my daughter about my condition. I wanted her to appreciate the simple things, to grow up not to be a spoiled princess, but a strong, independent woman. And I have to admit, I was afraid that money would change her, like it had changed my father. Sighing heavily, I set the empty cup aside. It was time to tell Hazel the whole truth about our family, about my father, about the decisions I'd made my whole life. She deserved to know. With that thought, I drifted off to sleep, but sleep didn't come for a long time. I tossed and turned, remembering the look on Pierce's face when he found out who I really was. Shock, disbelief, then something akin to fear. It wasn't the effect I'd expected my confession to have. It wasn't what I'd kept secret all these years. I woke up this morning to the phone ringing. Hazel. "Good morning, Dad." Her voice sounded tired but determined. "Can I come over now?" "Sure, baby girl," I answered, glancing at the clock. It was only 8 in the morning. "I'll make breakfast." "You don't have to," she paused. "I'm not hungry. It's just, I need to talk to you." "I'll be waiting," I said, and hung up. After a quick shower and getting dressed, I still made breakfast. I knew Hazel often skipped meals when she was nervous, and hungry conversation was rarely productive. She arrived half an hour later. I watched from the window as she parked in front of the house, not in her usual Volvo, but in a cab. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, pale face, her hair carelessly pulled back into a ponytail. She was wearing yesterday's outfit, but instead of elegant shoes, she was wearing simple sneakers. I opened the door before she could knock. "Hi," she smiled weakly. "I apologize for the early visit. You know it's always good to see you." I hugged her and felt her snuggle up to me for a moment, like a little girl looking for protection. We walked to the kitchen, where I had already set the table. Scrambled eggs and bacon, toast, freshly brewed coffee. "Mom, I said I wasn't hungry," she said, but she sat down at the table. "I didn't insist," I smiled, moving my plate toward her. "I just put it down out of habit." She shook her head, but took her fork and began to eat slowly. I sat across from her, watching her. Despite her fatigue and stress, she looked so much like Elaine. The same green eyes, the same reddish hair, the same stubborn chin. "Did Pierce call?" I asked, breaking the silence. She nodded. "All night. I turned my phone off after the 10th ring. I turned it back on this morning and found 32 missed calls and 47 messages." "What did he say?" "First he apologized. Then he threatened. Then he apologized again." She sipped her coffee. "Classic Pierce. He's always like that. After a fight, first he apologizes, promises to change, and when he sees that it doesn't work, he turns to threats and pressure." I frowned. "Do you often have these, cycles?" She grinned bitterly. "More often than I'd like to admit. Usually over little things. I dressed wrong, said the wrong thing at a corporate event, forgot to call his mother on his birthday. But sometimes," she paused, searching for words, "sometimes he just snapped. For no apparent reason. He, I didn't know how to ask what I was afraid to hear. Has he ever hit me?" She finished for me. "No, never raised a hand. But there are other ways to hurt, Dad. With words, with control, with coldness." I felt anger rising inside. How could I not see that my daughter was unhappy? How could I let this man hurt her? "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked quietly. She put her fork aside and looked at me. "Because I was ashamed. Ashamed to admit that I was wrong, that I married a man who wasn't who I thought he was. She lowered her eyes. "I didn't want you to be disappointed in me." "Baby," I took her hand. "I could never be disappointed in you. Never. Even if I'm such a fool to let myself be deceived." There were tears in her eyes. 2 years, Dad. 2 years I've lived with a man who doesn't respect me, who's ashamed of my family, who—" She hesitated. "Who controls my every move?" "What do you mean by that?" I asked, feeling my heart clench. She took a deep breath. "He checks my cell phone, keeps track of my spending, decides who I can socialize with. When I started being friends with a new coworker, he made such a scene that I had to stop communicating with her. He even insisted I install an app that tracks my location. For my safety, as he said. I remained silent, stunned. My smart, strong daughter, whom I had raised to respect herself and her boundaries, had allowed herself to be driven into such a cage. I know what you're thinking," she continued as if reading my mind. "How could I let it happen?" But it was gradual, Dad. Little by little. At first it seemed like caring, like love. And then I just didn't know how to get out. "And now," I asked, "what are you going to do?" She smiled genuinely for the first time this morning. "Something clicked yesterday, Dad, when I saw him talking to you, when I heard those awful words. It was like a veil fell from my eyes. I saw the real him, a petty, angry, insecure man hiding behind the mask of a successful businessman." She straightened up, squared her shoulders. "I'm filing for divorce. I already called my lawyer this morning." I squeezed her hand. "Are you sure? It's a big step." "Absolutely," she nodded. "I can't live with him anymore. Not after he showed his true colors. Not after he insulted you." She paused. "And not after what I learned about you, Dad." I realized it was time for the conversation I'd been avoiding all these years. "Yeah, about that," I sighed. Dash. "I guess I owe you an explanation. You own stock in Blue Ridge Technologies?" She shook her head. one of the largest technology companies in the country. Are you, rich, Dad? Really rich? Rich enough not to worry about money, I admitted. But it's not what defines me, Hazel. It never has. But why did you hide it? There was no accusation in her voice, only genuine curiosity. Why did you live like an ordinary postal clerk? I got up and went to the window. Beyond it was a view of the lake, calm and majestic in the morning light. How many times had I stood here looking out at that water, thinking about the past I couldn't change and the future I was trying to protect? Because I've seen what money does to people, I finally said, especially big money, suddenly dumped on their heads. I saw it in my father's example. Hazel looked surprised. Grandpa Frank? But you always said he was an accountant, that he died when you were 16. He did die when I was 16, I nodded. But he wasn't an accountant, at least not always. I went back to the table and sat down, preparing to tell the story I'd kept secret most of my life. My father, Franklin Drucker, was a successful investor. He started out as a simple accountant, but he had a talent for finance. He saw opportunities where others saw only risks. By the time he was 40, he had made a small fortune investing in real estate and stocks. We lived in a big house in the Chicago suburbs, had everything: expensive cars, vacations abroad, private school for me. I paused, remembering those times, vivid but colored with bitterness in my memory. And then something changed. My father became obsessed. It wasn't enough for him to be wealthy anymore. He wanted more money, more power, more recognition. He started making more and more risky decisions, investing in questionable projects. And in the end, he failed. Lost almost everything. Hazel listened without interrupting, her eyes wide open. He couldn't cope with the loss, I continued quietly. He started drinking. A little at first, then more and more. His mother tried to help him, but I shook my head. One day she just couldn't take it anymore. She packed her things and left. I stayed with my father. I was 14. Oh, Dad, Hazel whispered. The next 2 years were hard. Dad drank more and more, worked less and less. We lost the house, moved into a small apartment. I went to work after school to make ends meet. And then, when I was 16, I came home and found him. I hesitated, but I made myself finish. I found him dead. Heart attack from alcohol intoxication, the doctor said. Hazel jumped up and hugged me. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't know. I hugged her back, feeling a lump come up in my throat. I never told anyone that story. I didn't even tell your mom right away. It was too painful. But then what happened? She asked, returning to her seat. How did you cope? Where did you go? Aunt Maggie, my father's sister, took me in. She was a simple, practical woman. She worked as an elementary school teacher, lived modestly but decently. It was she who taught me to appreciate the simple pleasures of life: a good home, honest labor, real relationships. I smiled, remembering this amazing woman who replaced both my parents. When it was time to go to college, I received a small inheritance. The only thing left from my father's fortune. Not much, but enough to get me started. I could have spent the money on school, but instead I decided to work and study at the same time and invest the inheritance. Like your father, Hazel remarked. So, yeah, but not like him, I shook my head. I didn't chase after quick profits. I chose stable companies, invested for the long term, and most importantly, I never let money define who I was. I sipped my cooled coffee and continued. When I met your mom, I was already a wealthy man. Not rich, but I had good investments. I could have stayed out of work, lived off the interest. But I chose a different path. I took a job at the post office because I liked it. Simple, honest, useful to people. And did your mother know? Hazel asked. Yes, of course she did. We never kept anything from each other. She supported my choice, said she loved me for who I was, not what I had. And then I was born, Hazel said quietly. And you became the center of our universe, I smiled. We wanted you to grow up to be a normal child, to appreciate labor, to respect people regardless of their status, to understand that happiness is not in money. So we decided to live modestly like a normal family. And Blue Ridge, she asked. When did you invest in it? 23 years ago, I answered. It was a startup founded by two engineering graduates. They had a great idea and no money. I met them at an investment forum and I sensed the potential. I invested a significant amount, became one of the first investors. I shrugged my shoulders. I got lucky. The company took a shot. Hazel shook her head. I can't believe it. All these years, you could have lived a very different life. We could have lived differently. And what would have been different? I asked. Would we have been happier in a big house with expensive cars and private schools? I don't think so. We were happy here, Hazel. Really happy. She thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, we were. I remember our camping trips, picnics at the lake, evenings playing board games. It was simple happiness, but it was real. Exactly, I smiled. That's why I've never regretted my decision. And to be honest, I never planned on revealing that secret, especially after your mom died. I was afraid you'd, change when you found out about the money. How did your father change? She asked quietly. Yes, I admitted. Stupid, I guess. You're not him, but fears aren't always rational. She stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the lake as I had a moment ago. I understand why you've been hiding it, Dad, she said finally, and I'm not angry. I really am. It explains a lot, especially the last few years. What do you mean? When I met Pierce, she turned to me, I was attracted to his confidence. He knew what he wanted and how to get it. He had ambition, plans, connections, all the things I thought were missing in my life. She smiled sadly. I thought I wanted more, that I was cramped within the confines of the life you and Mom had chosen for me. And really, I asked, in reality, I just didn't appreciate what I already had. She shook her head. The freedom to be myself, the love that didn't require conforming to some standard, simple joys that no amount of money could buy. She walked back to the table and took my hand. Thank you, Dad, for everything you've done for me, for trying to keep me from making the mistakes your father made. I'm sorry I made mine anyway. Hey, I squeezed her hand. Mistakes are part of life. It's not that we fall down that matters. It's that we find the strength to get back up. She smiled through her tears. You always know what to say, don't you? Not always, I shook my head. I'm just on your side, baby. Always have been and always will be. We sat in silence for a while, just savoring the moment of intimacy that had been sorely lacking the past few years. What are you going to do next? I finally asked. After the divorce? She took a deep breath. I don't know. I'll stay in a hotel for a while until the lawyer takes care of the formalities. Then I'll probably get an apartment. I'll keep working for the company. I love my job, and it has nothing to do with Pierce or his family. You could always come back here, I suggested, to your old room. Thanks, Dad, she smiled. I'll think about it. But first I need to, sort myself out. Figure out who I am without Pierce. Get my real self back. I nodded. I understand, and I'll be there for you, whatever you decide. She stood up and hugged me. I know, Dad. I've always known that. In that moment, I felt that despite all the difficulties that lay ahead of us, everything was going to be okay. My daughter was with me again, not physically, but emotionally. The wall that Pierce had erected between us had crumbled, and that was what mattered most. I have to go, she said, pulling away. I have a meeting with my lawyer in an hour. Sure, I stood up. Keep me posted, okay? She nodded. I will. And Dad, thanks for telling me your secret yesterday. It made a big difference. I didn't do it for effect, I admitted. I just couldn't stand hearing him talk to you like that anymore. I know, she smiled. But thanks anyway. It gave me the strength to see the truth and the courage to do what I should have done a long time ago. I walked her to the door. On the threshold, she turned around. You were right all along, Dad. Money is just a tool. It doesn't make a person better or worse. It just reinforces what's already inside. With those words, she left, and I was left standing on the doorstep, watching the cab take my daughter toward a new chapter of her life, a life where she could finally be herself. The next few days flew by in a flurry of decisions and actions. Hazel didn't hesitate. She filed for divorce the day after we talked. I offered her to stay at my place, but she preferred a hotel. She needed neutral territory to think things over and plan the next steps. Pierce, predictably, didn't take her decision calmly. He called and wrote nonstop, alternating pleas for forgiveness with threats and accusations. Fortunately, Hazel had the wisdom not to enter into a long discussion with him. She made her position clear. The marriage is over. The decision is final. Further communication, only through lawyers. On Wednesday, the fourth day after the incident at the restaurant, she called me early in the morning. "Dad, can you come to the house with me today? I need to get my stuff while Pierce is at work." "Sure," I answered without hesitation. "What time should I pick you up?" 11 o'clock? Pierce would definitely be at the office. He had an important meeting with clients. There was determination in her voice mixed with anxiety. I understood her feelings. Even when you walk away from a toxic relationship, it's always a painful step. "I'll be at the hotel at 11, I assured her. "Don't worry, everything will be fine." At the appointed time, I pulled up to the Lakeside Inn, a small, cozy hotel by the lake. Hazel was waiting for me at the entrance, dressed simply and practically. Jeans, sweater, comfortable shoes. Her hair was gathered into a simple ponytail, and there wasn't a trace of makeup on her face. She looked younger and at the same time more confident than she had in recent years. "Hi, Dad." She got into the car and gave me a big hug. "Thanks for agreeing to help." "That's what fathers are for," I smiled. "How are you?" "Nervous," she admitted. "I'm afraid Pierce might come back early or something." "If that happens, we'll just leave," I assured her. "You have every right to get your stuff." She nodded and we hit the road. Their house, or now Pierce's house, was in the upscale neighborhood of Big Bear Lake, across the lake. A large modern mansion with panoramic windows and manicured grounds. When Hazel first showed it to me 2 years ago, I thought it was more of a showpiece than a place to live. Too perfect, too cold, too inanimate. We pulled up to the house and Hazel pulled out her keys. Her hand trembled slightly. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked. "Yum. We could send a lawyer here or hire a transportation service." "No," she shook her head. "I have to do it myself. It's, symbolic, you know? I'm walking out of this life on my own, taking only what's truly mine." I get it. Sometimes physical actions help solidify emotional decisions. The house greeted us with cold silence, spotlessly clean surfaces, designer furniture, artwork on the walls. Not a single personal photo, not a single detail that sticks out from the overall style. It's like no one's ever lived here. "Where do you want to start?" I asked, looking around. "The bedroom," Hazel decided. "That's where my personal things are. My clothes, my jewelry. Then the study, my books and papers." We went up to the second floor. The bedroom was as impersonal as the rest of the house. Gray and white, minimalist furniture, perfect order. "Pierce doesn't like clutter," Hazel explained, catching my eye. "Everything has to be in its place. Always." She opened a large built-in closet where her things took up about a third of the space. Carefully hung dresses, suits, blouses, all in muted tones. No bright colors. "I don't recognize these clothes," I remarked. "Is this all new?" Pierce insisted that I update my closet after the wedding. She began to take things off the rack. Said a financial advisor's wife should look the part. He gave my old clothes, gave my old stuff to charity, without my knowledge. I felt anger rising up inside. How could he treat my daughter like that? Handle her things, her choices, her life? "Do you take all of this?" I asked, nodding at the designer outfits. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, only what I really like. The rest, let it stay here, like this life." We began to methodically gather her things. Hazel selected only the essentials. Her favorite jeans, comfortable sweaters, a few dresses she really liked. She also took jewelry selectively. The ones she bought herself or received as gifts from me and friends. The engagement ring and Pierce's expensive gifts remained in the jewelry box. As we moved into the study, I noticed a change in her mood. It was as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders, her movements freer, her voice more confident. "You know," she said, gathering up her books, "I didn't think it would be so liberating. It's like I can finally breathe." "Sometimes you have to let go of something to move on," I replied. "Even if it hurts," she nodded. "You're right. And you know what? I don't have any regrets. I don't regret anything, not even the marriage to Pierce. It was a necessary lesson. We loaded her things into the car and were just about to leave when a black Jaguar pulled into the driveway. Pierce had gotten back early. Shit, Hazel whispered. I thought he had a meeting until 3. Relax. I put my hand on her shoulder. We're not doing anything illegal. You have the right to get your stuff. Pierce jumped out of the car, his face contorted with rage when he saw us. What the hell are you doing here? He shouted, running up. This is my property. You have no right. The house is your property, Hazel replied calmly. My things are mine. I just took what belongs to me. Nothing here belongs to you. He grabbed her arm. Everything you have, I gave you. Everything. I stepped forward, separating him from his daughter. Get your hands off me, Pierce. Now. He let go of Hazel, but he didn't back down. And you have no right to be here at all. This is private property. I'm here at your wife's invitation, I said calmly. Who, by the way, is still legally part owner of this house. That silenced him for a moment. He shifted his gaze to Hazel. Do you really think you can just walk away? After all I've done for you? His tone changed from angry to almost pleading. Hazel, please. I wasn't myself that night. You know the pressure I'm under at work. I didn't want to say all those things. But you said them, Pierce, she said firmly. And it wasn't just that night. It was the last straw in a series of everything. Our marriage is over. I've filed for divorce. My lawyer will contact yours. His face contorted again. You're going to regret this. You think you can just walk away and that's it? I have connections, influence. I'll ruin you with lawsuits. I'll get you fired. On what grounds? I asked, feeling my blood boil. Because she decided to walk away from an abusive relationship? Abusive? He laughed. I gave her everything. Status, money, position in society. She was a nobody when I met her. She was and is my daughter, I said quietly. And she's always been somebody. A smart, talented, kind woman that you tried to remake to your standards. He snorted. Of course you would say that. A loser father who's worked at the post office all his life and lives in a lakeside cabin. A father who owns 20% of Blue Ridge Technologies, I corrected him. The company that's your firm's biggest client? Or have you already forgotten that? His face changed. Fear flashed in his eyes, quickly replaced by calculation. You can't threaten me with business, Ty, he said in a different tone. That's blackmail. It's not a threat, I shrugged. Just a reminder of the facts. I would never use my position to hurt anyone's career, not even yours. But I also wouldn't tolerate you threatening my daughter or trying to stop her from starting a new life. Hazel put her hand on my shoulder. Let's go, Dad. There's nothing more to do here. We got into the car. Pierce stood in the driveway, his shoulders slumped. At that moment, he didn't look like a formidable financier, just a lost man who didn't understand how his perfectly constructed life had fallen apart overnight. As we pulled away, Hazel took a deep breath. Thank you for being there for me. I'm not sure I could have done it alone. You're stronger than you think, I replied. But I'll always be there for you when you need me. We took her things to the hotel. She planned to stay there for another week while the lawyer sorted out the initial formalities of the divorce and while she found a permanent place to live. I've seen a couple of places, she said as we unloaded the car. There's a nice little house on the North Shore, rented out on a long-term lease. Not far from you, by the way. The one by Pine Cove? I asked. Yes, that one, she smiled. You know it? Sure, I nodded. Belongs to Edna Miller, the widow of a forester. It's a nice house, solid. It's a nice place. I'll go and see it tomorrow, Hazel decided. Will you come with me? I want your opinion. I'd love to, I agreed. The next day we went to see the house. It was much more modest than Pierce's mansion, but it had what was missing there. A soul. Wooden walls, large windows overlooking the lake, a cozy kitchen, a fireplace in the living room. Edna, the landlady, immediately took a liking to Hazel. I like to rent to good people, she said. Money is not the main thing. Hazel immediately signed the lease. There was an enthusiasm in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. This is going to be my new home, she said as we walked out onto the porch. A place where I could be myself. Over the next week, she slowly moved things in and settled in. I helped in any way I could, fixing a couple of creaking floorboards, fixing a leaky faucet, hanging shelves in the kitchen. We went shopping together for furniture, not designer furniture like the Pierce house, but simple, comfortable furniture, the kind Hazel liked. One evening, as we sat on the porch of her new house with cups of tea, watching the sun set behind the mountains, she suddenly said, "You know, this is the first time in a long time I've felt free, like I can breathe with a full chest." "I'm glad to hear that," I smiled. "You deserve to be happy." "I wasn't happy with Pierce," she admitted. "At first I was in love, fascinated, flattered by his attention. But happy? Number. I kept feeling I was playing a role, that the real me wasn't good enough for his world. And now? Now I know I'm good enough as I am," she smiled. "And if someone doesn't see that, that's their problem, not mine." I raised my cup. "To new beginnings. To new beginnings," she repeated, clinking her cup with mine. Pierce, to our surprise, didn't complicate the divorce proceedings. Perhaps my reminder of business ties played a role, or maybe he just realized he'd lost. His lawyer contacted Hazel's lawyer and offered fairly fair terms. She would receive a generous settlement in her share of their jointly acquired assets. "He's trying to buy my silence," Hazel said when she heard about the offer. "He's afraid I'll tell everyone what he was really like." "Maybe," I agreed, "or maybe it's his way of apologizing." "Either way, I accept the terms," she decided. The sooner this was over, the better. By the end of the month, the major formalities were settled. Hazel had moved completely into her new home and was back to work. Her company, fortunately, was in no way connected with Pierce's firm, so there was no professional overlap. She began to return to her old self, the Hazel I had known before she was married. She started wearing bright colors again, grew out her hair, which Pierce insisted be kept in a strict shortcut, and returned to her old hobbies: reading, hiking, photography. One weekend I went to her house for lunch and found her in the kitchen, cooking lasagna according to Elaine's recipe, humming along to the radio. "I haven't seen you like this in a long time," I remarked, kissing her on the cheek. "Like what?" She smiled. "Happy," I said simply. She thought for a moment. "You know, I'm really happy. Not all the time, of course. Sometimes I'm sad, sometimes I'm scared. But overall, I feel like I'm living my life again, not someone else's." We sat down at the table and the conversation turned to the future. Hazel told me that she had been offered a promotion at work. Now she would be in charge of her own project. "It's a big responsibility," she said. "But I'm ready. I want to develop, to move forward." "I don't doubt you," I smiled. "You've always been determined." "Like Mom," she smiled back. "Remember when she decided to take up pottery? Everyone said she'd never make it, but within 6 months she was making such beautiful vases that the local gallery offered her an exhibition." "I remember," I nodded, feeling my heart clench at the memory. She never gave up if something was important to her. "I want to be like her," Hazel said quietly, "strong like her, and wise like you." "You already are," I assured her. "Maybe you just don't always realize it." After lunch, we went for a walk along the lakeshore. The day was clear, cool, with a light breeze ruffling the crowns of the pines. The mountains were reflected in the calm water, creating an almost mirror image. "Do you think I'll ever be able to trust people again?" Hazel suddenly asked. "After everything that happened with Pierce?" I thought for a moment. "I think so, but it takes time and the right people around you." "I think I'm too naive," she admitted. "I believe in the good in people too easily." "Shoko, that's not a flaw," I countered. "Seeing the good in people is a gift. It's just. You also have to recognize the warning signs when they appear." She nodded. "I'll be smarter next time. If, of course, that next time ever comes." "Don't rush things," I advised. "The most important thing now is to find yourself. Everything else will come." We reached a small pier jutting out into the lake and sat down on a bench. We were silent for a while, enjoying the peace and beauty of nature around us. "I'm still mad at him, you know," Hazel finally said. "At Pierce, for the way he treated me, the way he talked about you, the way he made me feel like I wasn't good enough." "It's normal," I replied. "And anger is part of the healing process, but try not to get stuck in it. Don't let the past determine your future. How do you manage to be so wise? She smiled, leaning against my shoulder like she used to do as a child. Years of mistakes and lessons, I grinned. And good teachers. We sat like that until dusk, talking about everything and nothing, like old times. Then we walked slowly back to her house, where an unexpected guest was waiting for us on the porch, a ginger kitten curled up on the mat. "Where did you come from, little one?" Hazel crouched down, gently stroking him. The kitten reached for her hand and meowed softly. "It looks like you have a new neighbor," I remarked. "Some looks like it," she smiled, taking the kitten in her arms. "Hello, little one. Are you looking for a new home too?" The kitten purred, settling into her arms, and that settled the matter. Hazel named him Rufus, after a character from a book she loved as a child. And so another new element in her life was added, caring for another creature, small and defenseless. As the weeks went by, I could see my daughter slowly coming back to her real self. She started seeing the friends she'd abandoned during her marriage to Pierce, enrolled in photography classes, and started visiting me more often. Our relationship was restored. Now we could talk about everything again, like we used to, without the filter that Pierce's presence in her life had created. One evening, as we sat on my veranda watching the stars, she suddenly said, "You know, Dad, I have no regrets. I don't regret anything, not even marrying Pierce." "You don't?" I was surprised. "No," she shook her head. "It was a necessary lesson. I'd learned what I didn't want in life, and what I do. I became stronger, wiser, and I found myself again." I squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you, baby. Always have been." She smiled. "I know you are, Dad, and that's one of the things that got me through all of this. Knowing that I've always been good enough for you, just the way I am." In that moment, I realized that despite all the hardship, pain, and disappointment, we both came out of this story stronger and closer to each other. Status, money, prestige, all of that turned out to be tinsel compared to real values, love, honesty, and being true to your principles. As I looked at my daughter, calm and peaceful under the starry sky, I thought about how important it is to maintain dignity in all circumstances, to not let others define your worth, not to succumb to societal pressures or other people's expectations. I chose my path many years ago, a simple, honest life, despite financial opportunities. And although Hazel had to go through pain to realize the value of that choice, she eventually found her way. Her own path to happiness that didn't depend on status or other people's approval. And that was more important than any money, any prestige, any social standing. That was the real richness of being true to yourself and your values no matter what.